So I had this really interesting question that came up just a couple days ago, and that is, how do you determine if someone's died in the state of Florida? Now, obviously, if you're a close family member and you find out that grandmom's in the hospital, in most cases, you're going to be calling down to other family members, and family members will tell you, hey, I'm sorry, Matt, but grandmom has passed along. Oftentimes, the doctor may pick up the phone, particularly if you're that next of kin situation, and let you know, hey, I'm sorry, Matt, but your dad has died. Maybe you're listed in medical records and that sort of thing. But in this circumstance that I'm involved in, it was a conflicted family situation. So you got one family member that's down here that's taking care of the elder person, and family members up north learn that the elder person has been brought into the hospital. And that's where these tricky issues of power of attorney and healthcare surrogate come into play, because the family member that was down here was able to turn off the lights and shut down all communication with the people up north. And that reminded me of a really interesting case I had during COVID, where you had an important person down here, and that person had contracted COVID. And the family members, this was in fact the guy's mother, desperately wanted to get down here and see her baby boy. But because of the weird rules that were being put into place during COVID, they were absolutely refused any contact or communication by this individual while he was in the hospital, in fact, dying of COVID. Again, under those emergency procedures, what the health department and the hospitals had done was they would only allow one person into the hospital, and that person was designated at the beginning of the entry. And if you weren't that person, I care if you were the mom, don't care if you were the brother. This guy had a big extended family, but in fact, the wife was given that trusted contact, and she was the only person that was able to be in that hospital while that person, in fact, died. So the entire extended family up north had no input, no communication whatsoever. But this question was much more recent and much interesting, and that is, so you find out the person's in the hospital because you were talking to them. So in this case, grandmom's in the hospital or whatever, and you know that she's sick, and you're talking to nurses, you're talking to doctors down there, and then the other family member down here, because of the power of attorney, because of the healthcare surrogate, was able to flip the switch and completely turn off all communication. It was so blunt, this switch that had been flipped, that the family member that had been calling down here, talking to the doctors, talking to the hospital, were told immediately thereafter the person doesn't exist. And that's what prompted the phone call to me, because they were talking to the hospital, nurses, the relative and everything that was in the hospital, but they were told subsequently no one even exists. So that set me down this long pathway of what happens when you call in and no information is provided. And I had a consistent experience where I called in and they told me, nope, the person doesn't exist. And of course, that was a little weird to me, because I was pretty confident that the woman was telling the truth. And in fact, they were talking to the hospital. And then the hospital was just acting really weird when I called in. They, in fact, were lying when they said that they had no record of the person, which sets up a whole other, question and inquiry in my mind. The hospital absolutely lied to me when I called in, and they said we have no record of the person, which was a lie. But, under HIPAA and some other laws, I guess they could get away with it. So we did another thing that I recommend to everybody, and that was a wellness check. So a tool that people need to be aware of is welfare check. If you got an elder person living down here and you don't like the information you're receiving, maybe it's a new spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, you're the kid living up there, you're the other spouse living up there, whatever it is, you can call the police department, call the sheriff, they do a welfare check. That's what they did in this case. So we got a hold of law enforcement, and even law enforcement said, hey, this is really odd. The responses that the uniformed officer was receiving, they went down there in person, seemed odd. And what we discovered, well, I said there's one of two things. Either, number one, the reason why these responses are so odd was because the person died, and the hospital was not providing good information because they didn't want to let people know that the loved one had died over the phone. So that set me down the process. What sets up the death chain, if you will? So when someone dies in a hospital, the next thing that happens is an official report is generated. But in every hospital, they've got contracts with funeral homes. And usually the funeral homes through this process under the medical examiner death certificate reporting under 382.082. That starts this process of providing the death certificate. The funeral director is usually the person that must file the death certificate, and the statute provides that the funeral home has to provide and get the personal data from the legally authorized person. Again, that's usually the person on the power of attorney or on the healthcare surrogate. Under Florida Statute 40611, the Medical Examiners Commission is the one that notifies the next of kin when they get that reporting. What 382.011 says that the medical examiner must complete and sign their portion of the death certificate within 72 hours after notification, even if a formal cause of death has not yet been recorded. But the workflow starts out like this. The statute requires that a report be filed forthwith. What did that mean? Forthwith. Clearly that means immediately. And again, there's another interesting thing that I found out in this whole case. In 25, 30 years of doing this stuff, you learn something new. But when someone is deceased, the funeral home and the medical examiners are part of this database, and they start reporting, obviously, on a sequential basis. So Matt dies today, he's number 101. Susie dies, she's the next one in line, she's number 102. Ricky dies, he's the third one in line, 103. And again, under COVID, we had lots of these things ticking away one right after the other. But what we were doing in this particular case was trying to determine whether this woman had died. So the hospital was not providing any information. And I found out later it was because the person was on a lockdown of sorts, that the power of attorney was able to shut this person down and prevent any family member from running. But then I called the medical examiner, and the medical examiner said, yeah, it's the first time she'd ever had this question. What was their duty to respond to the public? Because obviously if someone's died, whether you're a family member or whatever else, that's a public event. And at some point in time, the medical examiner is required, and I think in this case it's under 72 hours to disclose when the person has deceased. And that can't be kept hidden forever. So the medical portion within 72 hours, and that takes us outside HIPAA. So I think HIPAA terminates at death. And that's obviously the requirement that hospitals keep people's medical information really quiet and private. But the bottom line is this. If the death has occurred, that trigger is when the medical examiner. So if you're trying to find out whether someone's died, you can call hospitals. If they won't communicate, I found out this little trick. You can find out what funeral home is associated with that hospital. And oftentimes the funeral homes will alert to your person being provided on that registry. But then within 72 hours at least, there's supposed to be this formal recording on the death certificate through the medical examiner's office. So if you're concerned about a loved one down here, concerned they may be in the hospital and died, I've just taken you this long process about what to do if they've died. If you're interested in more information, finding out about medical examiners, that sort of thing, please drop a comment in here. I'll see what I can do to provide additional information.